Pathological Demand-Avoidance in brackets PDA by Richard Woods at London South Bank University, PhD student, and I'm currently on an extended gap year. Yeah, um, this is a video that I'm making after I delivered a talk on PDA for an intellectual disability team. So yeah, should be interesting. A note some conflict of interest. Developing various tools on PDA, I do earn income from delivering training sessions on PDA and for doing work with Studio 3, mainly on the lower arousal based approach. And I reluctantly advocate for PDA to be diagnosed as a standalone construct. So, a bit about myself. I was diagnosed as autistic in 2012. I try to use post autistic identity. I'll kind of touch upon why a bit during the talk, which is mainly the fact that I'm more than just being autistic. Um, so I meet Elizabeth Newton's PDA profile, but I'm not emotionally attached to it, and I'm from a large family which has lots of baggage, and several members of it are neurodivergent. Example: my 18-year-old half sister has been avoiding school for 6 years, and their actions have been quite problematic for my family. Yeah, academically speaking, I'm part of the critical autism/disability studies group at London South Bank. I'm currently on an extended gap here from a PhD. Um, so I was a Frontiers in Education PDA Special Issue project lead, and I do peer review PDA manuscripts, and I try to equally respect divergent views and evidence to critically synthesize appropriate interpretations on PDA. This is my interpretation of PDA and its literature. Others may disagree. Um, this is just a well, it should be less than an hour. Should be probably about 45 minutes ish, because I won't have any interactions with the crowd and stuff. The actual talk went on for an hour and 10 minutes ish, because I was stopping for interactions and taking questions from the floor and that. This is adapted from what I recently delivered in October, November time ish, but it's meant to be more aimed at for an intellectual disability based crowd, and I'll kind of touch upon issues about it later. So yeah, um, Kind of a brief history of PDA and different models for it, demand avoidance and kind of role of biases in kind of judging demand avoidance. Talking about PDA strategies and kind of a transactional stress-based approach. There's loads of activities throughout this. If people want to stop and kind of reflect on stuff that's their own business, they can do that by just pausing the video. Um, so yeah, green slides with green text on the top has commentary notes. I'm not making these slides available after this. This I'm just doing to kind of put it out there so that people can use it as a reference if they want to. The only resource which I will do is I will do a very quick review of literature which has case studies of those with intellectual disability in, but that's just because it's just so few and far between. Um, so yeah, um, so just basically what do we know about PDA? Is just an open to the floor. There was some interesting responses. Um, you might also notice I have word puns at the top of the slide. Um, yeah, this is a typical thought experiment that I tend to do in front of such at the start of all kind of training that I do in that kind of area, autism as well. So I'll just ask, is this person autistic? So it lists 11 different traits. So it's like have a unique talent, e.g., such as role play, preference for stability, such as a best friend or routines, sensory sensitivities, e.g., cannot wear certain clothes or finds certain sounds painful, likes to have friends, perfectionism, e.g., will not stop until their work is perfect, avoids eye contact, has high anxiety, restricted range of interests, socially awkward, had language delay, so it only spoke after 4 years old, and is clumsy. So yeah, I had to kind of address the elephant in the room with me kind of doing a talk on PDA for staff that work with people with intellectual disability. So this diagram kind of conceptualizes how kind of PDA might relate in relation towards a proposed subtype of profound autism and DSM-5 autism. So on the x-axis and the bottom axis you have intelligent quotient, and on the vertical axis you have function slash inverse support needs. Please do not verify this diagram; it's quite problematic. You'll notice that there's a bigger grouping of the entire autistic population at the back. On the bottom left, you would have profound autism, which is meant to be for those with co-occurring intellectual disability slash and or language impairment. And on the bottom right, you have pathological demand-avoidance, as kind of described as a profile of autism, which is meant to be for the autistics which are speaking slash without intellectual disability. Which is a bit of an issue because I'm doing it as a team who meant to be focusing in those with intellectual disabilities. So this is a bit of a problem because most PDA descriptions are based around people who are speaking and without intellectual disability, and so most of its research. There's no validated tools for you working with people with intellectual disability in PDA off the top of my head, and it's a bit of an issue because it's just there's nothing for me to really draw upon, or very little, and even then, studies that are there has a high risk of bias. So yeah, so this is kind of what I talk about here. So this is a screenshot of Alexandra Harris, who is conducting a part-time PhD doing an ethnographic approach to investigating PDA in intellectual disability. So yeah, she doesn't seem to have reported yet, but they should be producing some interesting results. So if people want to kind of email her, I imagine she would appreciate the interest. Obviously, as long as you don't spam her. So yeah. So I was asked to provide a brief history of PDA, how it kind of got to where we did. So I kind of mentioned how Newson's PDA research was originated in Nottingham through the mid 1970s through to the early 2000s. She had a really weird thing where she conceptualized PDA as being part of this diagnostic group in which she created herself. So this is her own made-up one. She'd have PDA on the top right and autism on the top left, and then you have kind of language impairments down at the bottom, which is kind of dysphagia, asphagia, and dyslexia. It matters because she put an IQ line through there, so she viewed autism as being for those with low intellect and PDA for those with high intellect. And this kind of conceptualization kind of stayed constant throughout her PDA work. It also matters because with her taking like 20 to 30 years to kind of get her PDA cases, she kind of had to have stereotypical views of autism in order to kind of keep the diagnosis comparable in their kind of case notes. So, reason why people view PDA to be part of the autism spectrum is because of when the DSM-4 autism spectrum was replaced with the single autism diagnostic category. So this is DSM-4 pervasive mental disorders grouping, which you had Asperger's syndrome, autistic disorder, and pervasive mental disorder not otherwise specified, which is basically when someone did not meet the threshold for either Asperger's syndrome or autistic disorder. So that was the what's considered 3 autism subtypes, and the other 2 diagnoses were Rett syndrome and childhood disintegrative disorder. So yeah, the reason why it was kind of argued that PDA was autism was when the autism spectrum was subtypes were removed from the DSM-5. Well, they were excluded from DSM-5. People looked at this diagram from Newson's 2003 article and noted you have Asperger's syndrome and autism disorder, which was meant to be with those with learning disabilities. It is based on childhood impairment, and it has kind of PDA kind of grouped in this kind of family faced with mental disorders, which Newson did. it has some similar kind of tones to the previous grouping that Newson did, because you still got the language, you still have the language impairment categories here, PDA by itself, and she says it's related to autism, but it's separate. It's not based on childhood impairment. It's got like meant to have intact manipulative abilities and other bits and pieces. I don't want to critique this diagram. I do enough of that elsewhere. I just think it's really quite problematic that people have done this. I mean, they don't need to because the DSM-5 allows PDA to be diagnosed as a developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which is as a residual category. You can specify what it is. Maybe not that one, but there is a residual category which allows you to specify how someone meets PDA, and have it separate from autism if you view it to be a neurodevelopmental disorder. But that's tangential. So this is how I often describe PDA. So these are a series of kind of characteristics, and they're based on a series of kind of continuous spectrums. So the red areas indicate that the features are more impaired, and the green areas are that they're kind of less impaired, slash to be less problematic. Um, Left hand side you'll have PDA profile autism. Right hand side you'll have classic slash more straightforward autism. These features are like anxiety, avoidance to auditory demands, like various criminal behaviours, so like bullying, harassment, lying, stalking, stealing, etc. To fantasy and role play, to impulsivity, obsessive behaviour focused on other people, to need for control, slash drive for autonomy, rapid mood changes, reinforcement-based approaches such as applied behavioural analysis or positive behaviour support are ineffective for PDA, but they're meant to be effective for autism. And like, please do not reify this diagram. Like, that claim is really quite problematic, and quite a few people would take issue with it. To that, PDA has issues with social strategic slash manipulative avoidance behaviours, and PDA is meant to have relatively intact theory of mind because it's meant to be able to use strategic or manipulative behaviours. So something that's done strategically, it tends to be done kind of deliberately. Yeah. Um, the alternative way to view this is that PDA represents kind of repackaging of various co-occurring issues that are often presented in autistic people, and that just classic or more straightforward autism is just autism, and that PDA is something else. The reason why I mention this is because if you look at difficulties describing my medical notes, you'll see a lot of stuff seen in PDA basically. So you obviously got like anxiety, kind of speech delay. I have ADHD combined type, depression, dyspraxia indicators because they turn up in my sensory profile assessment. Obsessive personality, I'm not entirely sure why it's on medical notes. It just is there, and OCD traits and stuff. I should also have put on there. Demand avoidance is in my other notes. Not so sure if it's medical notes. It's people who know me well and work with me in like a professional capacity will note my demand avoidance. I missed off my dyspraxia, sorry, my hyperacusis and tinnitus, which is actually quite funny because at the end of the talk, they did a clap and I was like, please don't clap, like do the applause. Which I would have known not to do the clap if I'd put the hyperacusis and tinnitus on there. Hyperacusis is kind of pain from loud slash unexpected sounds, and or can be. Um, so yes, this is from Liz Nyon's PhD thesis, and she modelled PDA as being something as like autism plus other bits and pieces, so it's more than autism. She said that PDA seems to represent a kind of intersection of various kind of problems, so like callous and emotional traits, conduct problems, inattention slash hyperactivity, emotional symptoms slash anxiety, and kind of some autism features. Um, and I've kind of gone a bit further to say that where kind of like anxiety slash trauma, obsession defiance disorder slash conduct disorder, and ADHD features intersect, you get PDA. The reason why I don't have autism put on there is because I think PDA presents in non-autistic people, and why would you expect non-autistic people to present autism features? So there is some research that suggests that PDA is not predicted by autism as well, but there's also some that suggest that it is. It's just that the evidence space is so small and conflicted, and often just high risk bias as well. It's pretty much meaningless. Um, so yeah, Alison Moore took a more social constructionist based approach to PDA. So she was looking at mainly in childhood and the roles of like kind of culture norms, especially around gender, get intersect to lead to a child being given a PDA label. So she particularly said when a child, particularly young girls or females, when they transgress kind of cultural norms to kind of like assert the self-agency and stuff, they would be slapped on with a not slapped on with a PDA diagnosis, but they'll be kind of attributed with PDA. Um, yeah, she also acknowledges the interest in kind of PDA in autistic children. So yeah, um, this is just a quote from Jonathan Green, which points out that he suggests instead of PDA being a distinct thing, that PDA probably represents. Well, he put forward a hypothesis that it said represents a kind of a final kind of pathway to a variety of childhood vulnerabilities and environmental conditions, rather than a single developmental a single developmental entity. Um, Yeah, he says it represents a bunch of transactional processes that occur in children, different kind of developmental pathways and differences and problems, and a lot of different things have been described by PDS as a single unique thing. Um, and I think PDA is more likely to be that than a single standalone thing. Um, that makes sense to me because it fits into the broader literature around how psychiatric categories kind of present. They just shouldn't be seeing the differences they're claiming, basically, which is a big red light, warning light, in my view, anyway. Um, this is a GIF which shows a man in a panda suit wrecking wrecking an office worker's desk. Like he shoves the monitor off and the keyboard off and grabs the keyboard and like smashes it um, on the desk. So I asked the room like what their views to seeing someone like express quite extreme behaviours when subjected to kind of demands and stuff, and we had an interesting discussion around that. So yeah, so this is just me talking about demand avoidance. Which is demand is any stimuli which can force one to engage with. And these demands can be internal, so they can be like watching oneself receive a flu jab, or they can be external, such as like rules, boundaries, and requests from others. And the avoidance is kind of the resistance to demands. Generally, demand avoidance, well, it is transactional, and it is a general phenomenon in to human experience, and I would argue to animals general. But yeah, often like how we experience demand avoidance is related. What changes over time. Is often transient as well to like how aversive each specific demand is experienced at times. So yeah, this is a section where I kind of briefly talk around um, basically trying to describe demand avoidance, like the descriptors you apply to it. So this is kind of getting into the rational versus irrational demand avoidance debate. So originally, rational demand avoidance was proposed to suggest that there are good reasons for people to express demand avoidance. Um, More recently, Eaton and Weaver suggested that rational demand avoidance should be used to describe children who have kind of a rational or good reasons to express demand avoidance from observers' bias. So they particularly use it to describe a bunch of children who start expressing PDA features due to particular decline triggers, normally due to issues at school. Um, so yeah, um, it's been suggested that PDA's demand avoidance is illogical in nature, and many kind of autistic PDA advocates kind of split rational demand avoidance from PDA. So they define PDA demand avoidance to be as logical and therefore irrational versus kind of non-PDA demand avoidance is meant to be rational in nature. And I suggest look at Sadakat's memes. So there's a dichotomy being proposed of kind of rational demand avoidance is non-PDA, and therefore irrational demand avoidance is PDA, and I have huge issues with this. Done an entire talk on it and stuff. It's not good. So I've asked the room what potential problems they could have with this binary. See when people spoke about it. I put out that we might not want to apply descriptive terms to demand avoidance. Instead, we should be focusing on the fact that people are expressing demand avoidance, and that it's going to be a problem for those expressing it and those around them. And I was talking about if you're working with someone who is avoiding the demand to kind of change rooms, for example, you've probably got good reasons to ask the person to change rooms. And there's probably good reason for the person themselves to change rooms, but if they're avoiding it, it's being problematic for kind of everyone involved. So I think it's probably better of just to focus on the fact there is a problem here and addressing that for everyone's benefit than spending time applying a descriptor to demand avoidance. So basically, I say we should avoid that demand to categorize demand avoidance. So yeah, this is just a quote saying that the boundaries between autism subtypes and proposed autism subtypes are incredibly hard to define and measure. And there's other quotes I tend to present, but this is just the one that I chose to do. And this is just pointing out that like PDA demand avoidance is when it's labelled as being irrational, it's mainly defined by observer bias. So that tends to be by white, middle class, straight, male value judgments. So what is kind of rational is like inherently subjective. It's mainly done by kind of I said like mainly kind of cultural and societal norms, which are quite problematic. It also matters because different cultures will have different values. So what is rational/ordinary and irrational and analogy varies from culture to culture. And I gave the example of the pause. So like, non-autistics tend to clap some of the end of the talks, and as pointed out at the end of this training, I was given a clap or started to, and I was like, please just do the pause. um, yeah. Moving on. So this is a video which I tend to use here. So this is a link to a video which shows a bird pulling bird spikes off a ledge because this bird wants to use a ledge. Why the bird spikes on the ledge is to basically control birds from. It's basically to make birds not use the ledge, and the birds wanting to use it, so they just got rid of the bird spikes. They're just pulling them down. So I was asking who has a need for control in this situation, who has a drive for autonomy in this situation. So I was basically asking like who decides what is rational/irrational demand avoidance in non-speaking PDAs, in PDAs with intellectual disability, non-autistic PDAs, and PDAs from global majority cultures such as collectivist-based cultures. And yeah, it's a bit awkward when I'm doing this talk with the demographic I was doing it for because I kind of give examples around kind of from PDA tools later, indicating to kind of show the point that PDA descriptions as a thing is mainly based on those who are verbal and those without intellectual disability. We also had a brief conversation about the pathological descriptor. Like, do people like it? Do they not like it? Potential issues with it? Potential strengths with it? Why the pathological descriptor is used? So yeah, it was a bit problematic because it was kind of pointed out how like organisations will use a PDA attribution to basically deny providing support to people because they view the person as being problematic, as being inherently problematic instead of treating them as a human being, basically, and just approach the person with empathy and humility and going like, why is a person presenting this way, and kind of just trying to address the problems present instead of just fobbing off because they're given the PDA attribution. This is me. This question probably shouldn't have been in this slide because it's not so relevant. But it is something I kind of ask: is there a single manifestation of PDA profile? I.e., is there a single PDA profile and why? But this is a common question I ask people when talking about PDA. It's like, please can you list strategies that you think are good practice, such as allowing someone time to process information, um, or just kind of giving time and space for people to kind of stem. So I was able to kind of use my fidget spinning when I was kind of presenting this talk earlier. Um, when I would tend to kind of just stim on my long belt, which I tend to wear, is why it's primarily there. But yeah, and I asked people to kind of just compare their list of generic good strategies compared to PDA strategies, and what they tend to notice is that there's a strong overlap between the two. Um, so this is some PDA strategies that are listed from the Autism Education Trusts in 2019. So it's a specific key worker and trusted relationship, being flexible and adaptable, indirect praise, letting things go, negotiating by providing choices to pupils, positive relations, thinking aloud, like being mindful of tone of voice, treating anger as communication, like using humour, using role play, novelty in various materials, like using visual communication methods. What this is kind of like giving multiple ways to kind of convey information so people can kind of interact with it, and it's like always having like a plan B, for example, is just good when you interact with anyone you kind of technically have responsibility for. Um, yeah, it I have issues with people trying to verify PDs having a specific set of um approaches, but we'll kind of, as I said, if you compare kind of your list of generic good practice strategies with PDA strategies, you tend to see a strong overlap between it. This is just an example of like me being mindful of the demands that I was placing on other people. When a lot of people were likely to be stressed. So this is taken from after the American election last year in 2024, and it was a tweet that I made. Yeah, just be mindful of the demands that I can defer into another day. So like if I could avoid sending emails or asking questions of others until later, I did. Yeah. Lo and behold, that seems quite relevant, considering how the last 9 months have panned out. Um, this is me just asking, are PDA strategies fundamentally different from autism strategies, and why? Um, like, if you can, as long as you can justify your answer, that's what matters. Um, yeah, this is me just kind of pointing out that like the autism interventions equivalent to PDA strategies have been practiced independent of PDA for years. It has been noted that teachers already use strategies and resources which might be effective for PDA, which and this is also just pointing out that like one of the reasons why autism subtypes were removed, well, excluded from the DSM-5 was because there was no evidence for differential treatments between autism subtypes, and that like autistic people tend to note problems with traditional autism interventions. So that's mainly aimed at radical behaviorism-based stuff like applied behavioral analysis and positive behavior support. And again, that like early autism interventions have little to no good quality evidence suggesting that they work. So that's just broader. That's just part of broader issues in autism kind of research and practice and theory, that there's just really poor standards generally. So we're getting into kind of examples around like what does PDA kind of look like, and kind of issues in terms of that there's very little to go on to when you to apply what it might look like in those with intellectual disabilities. So it seems to be as if he or she's extracted from within, knows what to do or say to specific people, kind of lacking awareness of their identity, kind of driven by a need to be in charge. You kind of looking kind of or people just it includes kind of features that people will use to accept serve agency. So this is like complain about illness or physically incapacitate themselves to avoid a request or demand. Attempts to negotiate better terms with adults. I'd point out that trait would be seen as a positive in non-autistic people, and then like apparently mischievous behaviour. I should point out that these are literally items from like the main screening tools for PDA and the main semi-structured interview questions. Um, so Yeah, so I'm going to briefly touch upon transactional stress. So it's transactional in the environment. So a person becomes stressed when the stressor exceeds our resources or our coping mechanism. So and the person finds the situation taxing. To reduce someone's stress levels, you basically help where you reduce someone's stress by improving their coping mechanisms. But often a person needs to be kind of in a low stress environment in order to develop better coping mechanisms, which you're going to catch 22 there. Um, yeah, 2/3 of the stress behavior is triggered by demands or questions by other people. And I gave an example of this on the day with like a personal example from stuff going on recently. So yeah, and this is just talking about how the DSM-5 autism criteria has transactional stress baked into it. So if you look at criteria C, which is basically says that autism features must present from early infancy. There are two exceptions to that, and it says that symptoms must be present in early developmental period, but may not become fully manifest until social demands exceed limited coping capacities, or may be masked by learned strategies in later life. So basically, autism features might only be presented when someone is distressed or stressed into presenting them, which is pretty grim when you stop to think about it. Um, so yeah, stress and self-agency. So kind of problem behaviors can include like non-compliance, defiance, leaving an area, stereotypically self-injury or aggression. They can be triggered by everyday demands such as children, young persons finding the situation aversive, like around uncertainty, transitioning from preferred task to lesser preferred task, um, and kind of just such distress behaviours are associated with PDA existing continuing in the human population. So this is a diagram I have adapted from one that the PDA Society uses. So it talks about kind of how avoidance behaviours can be kind of viewed as being like some can be viewed as being like less problematic, and some can be viewed as being quite highly problematic, and tend to be expressed when people are kind of more aroused. So the kind of scale here is that the more highly aroused or stressed a person is, the more certain types of behaviours like to be expressed. But the escalation can be quite quick. So a person might appear calm, then they might go to distraction, excuse, procrastination, to um, reduce conversation, making sense. They can just reduce it to meaningless. To then going to physically incapacitating themselves. So like a hold of legs, or like hiding underneath a table, to like withdrawing to fantasy, to taking to either fully complying to then later breaking down, or to like taking control. I don't know what got tank that should be taking. Um, to like feeling aggression, agitation, like running away, self harm, like threats of harm, like being upset. So um, yeah, I mean yeah. So this is taken from Liz and Ion's 2019 kind of like she's just basically sharing her findings like to the public. So it's before it's published in an article. So um, she said that a person will experience demands, they'll find it aversive, and they will express avoidance behaviours until that demand is kind of removed, and they then get relief from that anxiety, and it kind of negatively reinforces. So you kind of get the cue, the activity, which is the avoidance behaviours, and then they get negative reinforcement when they get relief from the anxiety being taken away. So yeah, I've adapted this into a demand management cycle, which is based it's informed by the OCD cycle, which is again meant to be negative reinforcement based. So you have the demand, which can be internal or external. You have the anxiety or distress, and then you would have the avoidance behavior, which can be described as either rational or irrational nature. And they'll get temporary relief once avoidance behaviours kind of reach a certain threshold to have that demand being removed. So what can happen is that people can escalate through certain levels of avoidance behaviours until that demand is removed. Um, so what I'm basically saying is, if like distraction and excuses aren't working, they can escalate through the various behaviours until that demand is removed. And typically, if someone is like running away or being violent, that will get a demand being removed. Um, so yeah, I tend to model demand avoidance in three-dimensionally. So I have three axes here. So you've got the frequency of which demand avoidance features are expressed, and that's over any unit of time. So that could be a day or a week or a month. Then I have kind of the intensity of distress features being expressed, and that's just literally this. So towards the zero, you have like kind of calm, working your way through like distraction excuses, like full on to kind of aggression and like agitation and kind of harming and stuff. So um, and the other action axis is talking about is how highly aroused they are, so how stressed. So the more calm they are is more towards zero. So therefore the more deliberate the avoidance behaviours are being expressed. So the more manipulative, more strategic they are is more towards zero. The more compulsive the behaviours are, so the more highly aroused they are, is up this end. So this is looking at the more highly aroused they are, the more demand avoidance behaviours are expressed, is the more higher up on these axes they should be. And the more lowly aroused they are, the more they should be down here. This is just a threshold that I've taken from the DSM for when a feature is kind of medicalised as part of the disorder. So when the demand avoidance so when the disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, this is quite a low threshold because they are all terms. One, if you're talking about PDA profile of autism kind of descriptions, which some people will kind of claim it is, they will take a quite high threshold. So they will say it will be when demand avoidance is causing issues in kind of social and occupational and other important areas of functioning. So I'm just kind of noting that bit. So I've took the demand management cycle and I put it into a developmental model. Um, so you have kind of delayed development, social communication, and functioning issues, such as and also like kind of depression or trauma. They can feed into like kind of like core kind of PDA features such as like avoidance of order demands, comfort role playing pretend, obsessive behaviour, rapid mood changes, and social avoidance behaviours. And that can feed into kind of anxiety and kind of um, miss opportunities or kind of aversive situations. And they can kind of lead into how a person can develop and maintain basically a PDA kind of experience of life. And it kind of makes sense because if you're having rapid mood changes, that will affect the amount of social interactions you have and the quality of those social interactions, which can kind of lead to kind of like less well, well, um, like kind of social skill delays or like. And I did put that in quotation marks. Like it does make sense if you start to think about it. So yeah, and this is just a video showing like low levels of avoidance behaviours. So it's a woman entrepreneur who's started a lingerie business, and she's like seeking investment to kind of grow the business. And she talks to male investors or who might invest in a company, and she points out that these male investors get really comfortable when she's talking about like women's bodies changing and bras and stuff. So the male investors would start expressing low levels of avoidance behaviours. So this would be stuff like fidgeting, like making excuses and kind of used to make distractions to kind of. But when they kind of when the business owner like moves away to talk about kind of like money and that kind of stuff, those kind of low level avoidance behaviours kind of stopped. Um, and then this is just a way of kind of getting people to think about the demand management cycle, like what demand's being applied, the kind of anxiety, stress being experienced, like what avoidance behaviours are being presented, and when are they kind of getting relief from them, and from that kind of experience, that kind of demand and stuff. Uh, yeah, that's basically it. This has been quite quick. I don't know if I've waffled too much, but yeah, this is a point that I try to stress throughout the entire, or emphasize throughout the talk. Is that like empathy and humility are needed if we're going to help those expressing significant demand avoidance. As I keep pointing out, if anyone's demand avoidance is being significant enough to draw people's attention, um, we should be helping them because it's going to be problematic for those expressing demand-avoidance and those around them. Um, and it's where I said like expressing demand-avoidance is likely to be placing many demands on those people around them. For example, if a child young person is expressing demand avoidance to transitions or to going to school, that that's going to be causing problems for parents. Because obviously, if a kid doesn't go to school often enough, the parent can be prosecuted and fined and etc. So we do need to kind of be supporting those people around people expressing like demand avoidance. So, and it is important because there is like a report that came out last year that like PDA caregivers um, are subjected to kind of high rates of false, fabricated, induced illness claims, which doesn't really help the caregivers at all, and can cause real problems with the family and to the PDAs as well. So, and the final point I made is like be kind to yourself too, because like if you're working or supporting people who express a significant amount of violence, that's going to be stressful for yourself as well. So empathy and humility all round is I think in my view what's needed. And this is just me ending. I should point out that there is a flash in this side, so I'll get off that. So just ending with may your stimulating activities be many and your flow states long, which is equivalent to live long and prosper. Those are my contact information. The Twitter handle doesn't exist anymore, so I should really remove that. This is a bibliography because like I said, I adapted this from a talk. So sorry, I haven't had time yet to change this to Vancouver reference to start, which I'm going to do probably tomorrow. So if you want to stop the video at any time to check the bibliography, you can do. I'm not going to linger on the slides too long because you can do that, so I'm only be lingering on for like a few seconds at a time. I can't remember how many slides there are, like in the references, but I can't believe I deleted all of the number on that one. Yeah, we get towards the end because that's my traditional penultimate slide is are we there yet? So the ninth and last bibliography. So yeah, that's been a pleasure. Hopefully the audio is okay. Let's go and find out. Geronimo indeed. Oh, have a good week. Yeah, that was actually quite short.